everyone, Guillaume Lesuel here, host of the E-Commerce Wizards podcast, where I feature leaders in e-commerce and business. Today's guest is Mitchell Callahan. He's the CEO and co-founder of Saucal, which is an e-commerce agency. So he's an e-commerce expert, very well established in an agency. It works with a lot of big brand names out there, Amazon and some others. So today we'll talk about everything and anything e-commerce, but we will start specifically about how to make an e-commerce project successful. So if you are either considering to build an e-commerce website, or if you're currently in the process of building an e-commerce website, all kind of tricks, techniques, things to keep in mind, strategies to make your projects more successful, some pitfalls to avoid, and so on. So before we get started, a sponsorship message. This episode is brought to you by MageMontreal. If a business wants a powerful e-commerce online store that will increase their sales, or to move piled up dormant inventory to free up cash reserves, or to automate business processes to gain efficiencies and reduce human processing error, our company, MageMontreal, can do that. We've been helping e-commerce stores for over a decade. Here's the catch. We're specialized and only work on the Adobe Magento e-commerce platform. We do everything Magento related. If you know someone who needs design, support, maintenance, training, we got their back. Email our team, support@magemontreal.com, or go to magemontreal.com. That's MAGE Montreal.com. All right. So, Mitchell, thank you for being here today.
Yo, thank you, man. I was going to say you turned from agency owner to professional radio host pretty quick there.
It's practice, nothing natural about that. Go listen to episode 1. You know,
that's awesome.
Okay, so I'm happy you're here, and I'd like also to start. Maybe if you can give a short, 1-minute intro about you, your background as an e-commerce expert.
Yeah, for sure. Like you, I've been in the game for about 10 years. We started Saucal out of our apartment in Calgary, and we're big advocates of open source software, similar to yourself, except instead of working on a Magento, we work on WooCommerce exclusively. So it's the e-commerce stack for WordPress. It's the largest e-commerce platform by market share, and we primarily help customers consult, build, and maintain their online stores, and we help big brands integrate their software into WooCommerce in order to leverage the massive audience that is there. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's a growing industry, and it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. So Mitchell's a WordPress expert. I'm a Magento expert, but today we'll try to have all the advice to be as universal as possible, so that it's not platform specific. Doesn't matter if you're on Shopify, WordPress, Magento, anything else. Doesn't matter. So let's get started with it. What are some pitfalls to avoid when you're building a new e-commerce site and you're considering to build one?
Yeah, I think it's going to largely depend on where your business is at. Like if you're just starting and you have zero revenue versus if you've got 500,000 or $1 million or 5 million, that's really going to dictate the kind of approach you want to take. I think for me, like if you're not making any money, it makes sense to be scrappy and piece things together. And I've seen a lot of people build a business like that. Whereas I think if you've already got like a successful business, or you've got investor money and you have a foundation to build from, I wouldn't recommend going like super scrappy. The reason being, I just see people who build really weak foundations, and it costs them a lot more in the long run to, keep that site going and improve it. So, spend the money up front. The poor man pays twice, and get it done right with someone who's an expert. Is my biggest tip, and the biggest mistake I see over and over.
Okay, so people just starting too scrappy when they should have started build it well, just pay once, assuming they're established enough company with the correct financial backing to do this. Otherwise, if you have to be scrappy, we all start somewhere. Typically, an entrepreneurship journey, I started from nothing, and you have to walk every steps of it, and this might be a good time to be scrappy. So, okay, I'm going to add to this. So, depending on where you're at in your business, I agree with this thing. And one thing that I see a lot is small businesses wanting to invest way too much money on the design portion of it. And they will neglect the mechanics, the fundamental, the structure, the foundation, the technical, like that. So the design, of course, is important, represents your brand, represents your image, but you can work incredibly hard, believe that you have an amazing looking brand, and then you ask a few people around and none of them agree and they think the design's not good. So design is such a subjective thing that, of course, you want something that's a professional product, but perhaps don't try to win, a presence in the museum because it's such an artwork. Okay, so that's an easy way to exaggerate on the importance of design because the other person will not care that much if you've put a square or a circle, if it's blue, if it's yellow, orange. As long as the message is communicated clearly, the brands generate, you know, an aura of trust that you believe those are professional people that will deliver on their promises and so on. So it's way more important to have the messaging right, to have the offer right. That's the product market fit, that this is correct. This is what people are looking for. Don't overspend on the design. Like, start from a template if you're on the scrappy part, and don't invest too much, and don't turn your template based editing into a full custom project, that will cost a fortune. So for a startup, one place where you can save a lot of money is on the design, because most people will not realize how much work will go, how many work hours will go into editing a template. If you keep it simple, sort of go with the flow, select a template that you say, hey, I like the general art direction of this template. Don't turn a light theme into a dark theme and vice versa. Start from the right template and say, I like this. Just clean it up, remove sections that are not relevant, try not to change too much stuff, and just start listing your products online with quality information. It's way more important to put the time on the content for the product. Lots of pictures, lots of video, all the technical specs and all that. So like the focus there. It's like the website itself, it just needs to work in a way. Like, just put it online. It looks professional, looks okay. Like, don't spend too much time. Just move on and focus on true added value, which is your product catalog, and having an online website that does check out.
All great points, man. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I'm just thinking of a site that we're working on now, and they're very design focused. And I mean, I get it. Front end is sexy, right? Like, people want it to look good, and then they completely neglected the back end, and they're having so many errors and glitches anytime they have to change some of your breaks. And I mean, it's by design, they completely neglected the back. And yeah, I would much rather have a strong foundation and an ugly front end, because it's amazing how much you can sell with an ugly website too. And just to add to what you said, like, content is so important. The right content speaks to your audience, and lots of great imagery. Like, you're absolutely bang on with everything.
Yeah, so of course, if you're a super established company, you have a lot of budget, go for it. Have fun with the design. But of course, the design portion should have its own separate budget, and it should not come to lower the quality of the foundation and the content generation that will be put on the website. Okay, so that's a good first one. And we've looked at the startup versus established company. Any other pitfall that you have top of mind?
Yeah, we're big backend people. We do a lot of performance. If you're building on a Shopify, this is not something you really need to worry about. But when you're working on WooCommerce, for example, you got to make sure you have really good hosting. And again, a lot of people really neglect that part, and it's one of the easiest ways to increase your performance. So, aside from a good backend, we always have a really, really, really solid and reliable hosting. And like, that's one. And then one more, I would say, just given your content and stuff, like, define what your MVP is. You don't need to get everything perfect. Start getting checkouts, getting people buying stuff, and then you can start innovating and pivoting from there.
A very good point. And often I've seen, like, hosting being seen too much as a commodity, but it's not.
No.
Especially when you're hosting an e-commerce site, there is some specialization. Do they know the platform that they're hosting? Because some hosting company do have a page. They say, hey, we do Magento hosting, but they have a page about everything, and they don't really know any of those platforms. It's just a page to attract clients from their website. So do they actually have expertise on this specific platform? So when there's a problem, the system administrator can help the programmer to quickly resolve problems. That's very important for all the open source stuff. So yeah, hosting providers are really not all equal. Do you have some preferred vendors, a few of them?
Absolutely. And again, everything you just said was correct. When they're generalist hosting companies, you're not going to get great support. And so, at least in the WooCommerce land, we always use managed WooCommerce or managed WordPress hosts, because they have support that actually understand WordPress. So some of our favorites are always WordPress VIP or Kinsta or WP Engine. Those are all made exclusively for WordPress and WooCommerce.
Yeah, heard good things about those. And on the Magento side, we'll like stuff like MageMojo, WebScale, sort of bought partially or all of it, I'm not too sure. That's two. There would be JetRail, there would be Nexus, and there's a few more also that are very good. But to go with someone who actually has certified experts on Magento or WooCommerce in-house, part of their hosting providers, in there. So it really makes it different.
You said Nexus, eh? Yeah, because they have a presence in WooCommerce as well. So it sounds like they're big, but they're niching down into the respective spaces.
Yeah, they're fairly big, and they're purchased by another bigger one, like with the net stuff like that. So they do it properly. Okay. Any other pitfalls, or do you want to go to the positive stuff to that will help actually make the project a success, other than just like errors to avoid?
Oh man, just preparation is key. I just got a tattoo the other day, and I swear it took maybe 10 minutes to get it done. It was small, but the first 40 minutes I was in there, it was us playing on the iPad and drawing it out and stuff like that. And it was like everything was about preparation, and then execution was easy. So you spend the time doing your consulting and planning up front, and you'll have a lot less surprises, and you're not going to have to change things after they're already there. It would be crazy to change my tattoo after the fact.
Especially a tattoo, yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, lots of planning up front. It's good. Okay, so let's say lots of planning up front. It's true. This I've seen all extremes when working with other web agency. And the most classic one is not enough upfront requirement, not enough study time upfront. The agency, well, they need the sale, they want to move fast, and so on. Actually, for us personally, we've moved away from that model in quite an extreme way, that people cannot even buy a website from us right away. You can only buy the project, just like buying the architect's plan of a building. That's the only thing we will sell to you, is the planning. And if you like the planning and the budget that comes out of that plan, then you can buy a website from us. So a lot of agencies, they just jump in the process and they don't have enough information, like 2 Zoom meeting of 1 hour. Then, okay, we got it all down, let's go. No, you don't. Clearly you don't. That's how the process has been.
The project plan is worth its weight in gold. And, depending on how advanced your customer is, if they've been building software for a long time, that's a no-brainer. They would expect it and maybe even buy them a couple times. But yeah, if you're just starting out, know that if someone proposes that project plan, it's well worth it, and it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run.
For sure. It provides a clarification up front of everything, the vision, the requirements, the business needs. And very often we have notes written to say, okay, the customer wrote it this way, but maybe we have a different definition of the word, the marketplace or something. Okay, what does a marketplace means for you? For some people, it means an Amazon. For some other people, I've heard, well, it was not a marketplace at all what they meant. It was just a product feed and stuff like that. So it's very important to clarify all the wording, clarify all the requirements, and very often the requirement is written in a too simple way, like what to do. Okay, I want this. Okay, why do you want it? Okay, who needs this in your company? All right, how will it benefit them in their either daily job? It's the sales staff that will use the website to do sales in person and so on. So we need to get to the bottom of things and to understand why. And so if you're a customer here and you're getting an agency doing your site soon, or now it's already in the process, make sure they understand every single requirements and why you need it. And you can even write it this way. And let also the agency suggest solution. You may say a possible solution is this. This is what we could do. But here's the business need. Here's who it's for. Feel free to suggest a different how to do it. So you can lean on a proper partner there to suggest how to do things.
Dude, absolutely. You nailed it, man. And I think the more versed you are in software development, the better off the process is going to be. And that's just a thing that, like, any company that has an online presence has to understand software development. And some are better than others, but you need to have that skill going forward. And having knowledge of that and having someone on your side who can very much communicate with the technical team, you're just going to have so much more success.
Any other ideas top of mind can help?
Man,
project
some
being
totally
successful?
random, not necessarily approach your project, but as someone who travels a fair bit and I'm always in a foreign country, the one thing I really appreciate on websites is in the past, if they detected you were in Portugal, for example, they would just, start charging you in euros and the language would be in Portuguese. But I don't think your location should be tied to any specific language per se. So like I think the language and the location should be different. So a lot of the websites in Portugal, for example, you can register and say, "Hey, I'm in Portugal," but then you can also put your language as English, and it just opens you up to a better audience. So I think it's better to not just assume everyone in China wants Chinese or everyone in wherever Argentina wants Spanish. Have language separate from location.
Interesting. So you would not, let's say, do geolocation of the visitor to then automatically assign the language. You would leave it to a default choice, an international choice, which is like English, and
or
then you
whatever their
can just
browser is
change
in,
from.
or whatever they're
Okay.
using, right? Like,
Okay.
I think that's a
So
much better user experience.
so just select whatever their browser's in. Obviously, they speak that language.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good idea. I like that. Okay. All right. Another idea would be, let's say, to be sure that you have the time for that project and that it's a high priority for you, because it will take involvement. So let's say if you're the owner of the business or an executive, you don't need to be there at every meeting for everything, but you still need to review, and somebody else needs to be in charge of that project. So somebody in the team will need to be considered more or less, depending on the scope of the project, more or less as a part-time employee dedicated to their website, maybe half their time for the duration of the project. So let's say it's a 6-month project, a 1-year project. Again, depends on scope. Maybe it's smaller. But that means for all that time, there's an employee that is dedicated to the website and that their number one priority is that project. And this is true for any kind of project, not just a website project. When there's a new company initiative, internal initiative, who's in charge of this and who actually has time for this, that it's their number one priority and not just one to do in a list of 1,000. So that's how you guarantee success, not guarantee, but go to a much higher level of possibility of success with the project. Let's say that it's someone clearly assigned to that. This is your number one priority. Anything that comes in that's about the website, you just run with it. You get the approval in-house. You make sure it happens, follow up, reply, and so on. It makes a huge difference if you have the staff and bandwidth to actually handle the project.
We think the same, because that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about like your point of contact who works with the technical team. This isn't just something that like, all right, we've decided what we're going to do and you forget about it. Like you got to be on top of it. Yeah, it's a big deal and it really affects the mood of the team. So I couldn't agree with you more, dude.
Anything else top of mind?
I think, man, honestly, if someone went through all those, they're already doing pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. So, anything else that you'd like to discuss about e-commerce?
Well, what were some of those items? It's interesting with what's going on in the world right now. I use open source software, and I really like to see the proliferation of open source payments. So, Bitcoin's an obvious one, but you've got a lot of other cryptos, and you've got things like the Lightning Network, which is built on Bitcoin, and it's going to be amazing to see internet money that originated from the internet being used for e-commerce, and it'll make it a lot easier for a lot of businesses to sell because companies like Stripe, mind you, have made it a lot easier. They're developer focused, but Stripe's not available everywhere. And that's something I'm super excited about.
Okay, so yeah, I think you're big into crypto, and you're saying it will make it easier for merchants in which regards? Because let's say a Stripe or PayPal is fairly straightforward to put in place.
Again, just because they're limited to which countries they can operate in.
Okay.
So if you're in a country that's they don't support crypto's a great way, but I think more importantly, crypto is just free from government intervention. So I don't. There's a lot of. We're both Canadian, so whether you agree with
that's philosophical and political as a statement. Okay, you're free of government intervention. Yeah, you can you can talk about what's the future of currency and so on, and this is just a logical next step. Some will argue that crypto is close to worthless. It has no GDP. It's not producing anything, and it's worse than a Ponzi scheme. But again, those are opinions.
That's what someone would say who hasn't spent any time in crypto. I mean, that's an easy and effortless opinion to have. If you put in a little bit of work, it's going to be hard to think that way.
Yeah, as soon as there's enough people who cares about it and wants, that currency, and you decides to use it as a currency, then it is a currency. It's what it is. Can always challenge. Does the volatility of it, doesn't that bother you? Like to accept, let's say, as a merchant, some payments in cryptocurrency that is so volatile. Like tomorrow, it might be worth $10,000 less than it was today at the time of the transaction.
I mean, no, generally not, because the forward trajectory, because there's some price understanding going on right now, price discovery. Sorry, Bitcoin appreciates 200% a year on average. Whereas if you look at like what's happening to our fiat money, the Canadian dollar, US dollar, I mean, they've created most of the money that's been created in the last year is more than it's like 80% of all money in existence. So all you're seeing is a trajectory down. So is that a worry for me? Not really. I'd much rather my currency appreciate than depreciate. And realistically, if that's a concern, you can use what's called a stable coin. So you can use it's called USDC, and it's a virtual currency. It's a cryptocurrency that's pinned to a fiat currency, so you get a stable value.
Okay. So the goal of that USDC would be just to get a stable value, but then it means you're not trying to make money off of the currency, because right now people are buying Bitcoin just because they believe that the future is better, that they will have 200% appreciation. So in a way, it's bought for speculation purposes.
That's one way to look at it. I think the other side of that coin is they're buying Bitcoin because they don't want their money to lose its value. So I always tell people, like, will you get rich buying Bitcoin? Maybe. It depends on how much you buy. But it makes sure you're not going to be poor. Like, it makes sure that your money is actually still there and it has value.
Okay, so you're concerned about, okay, now we're like talking world economics, macro stuff, because of course each currency, has different value throughout history, and I read sometimes about that stuff, and most currency did not exist, 150 years ago, and they've almost, there's only like 20 currency out of over 1,000 that were there 150 years ago and still exist from everything. It merged into euro. Some regimes go away and whatever. So you can have a legitimate concern, say, hey, is this currency stable and worthwhile to hold, or should I actually hold a different currency from a different country, or even virtual currency, or just split my portfolio into a lot of these? Like that. Those are interesting concern. Of course, if someone has investments, the more that becomes a concern. Otherwise, you're not concerned about that at all. You just say, hey, we invest in the business. Let's grow an e-commerce store.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing to keep in mind, I guess we're getting away from e-commerce a bit, but most of the previous currencies were backed by gold. So gold was still the money. The paper just represented gold. And a lot of the problems we have in this world started in the 70s when the world got moved away from gold, and that's where you really see inflation and cost of goods really going through the roof.
There's someone really interesting called Ray Dalio. If you want to read about that stuff,
he's great.
Yeah, okay, so you know about him. There you go. So anyway, you don't need to listen to us talking about that. Just go read Ray Dalio. He's the world expert on that.
His new book, mind you, he doesn't know very much about crypto, but his book on global cycles of money and empires is fascinating.
It is completely
and if
fascinating.
anything, he's reinforcing the point that you need a sound money that's not fiat, because he doesn't have a rosy outlook.
Yeah. So just as one summary of a key idea that is in that book or from that person is that a lot of very important life cycle that happens, those cycles are so long that they have not happened yet in your own lifetime. So we have a bias as human being that you say, okay, well, the last 10 years are great, so the next 10 years are going to be great, or the last 10 years were terrible, there was a recession, a war in that country, whatever. So that person has a more pessimistic view of the future and might not capture the actually change in cycle that now it's an upswing, it's time to invest, whatever. So you say that our bias as human being is based on what we've lived during our lifetime. But if you want to understand the truly big picture, those big money cycles happen typically more than over your lifetime, or have already started before your lifetime. So therefore, you need to understand history and the big cycles to really know like what's next, and not just rely on your own personal experience. That's a really major learning point from that guy.
Well said. Very well said.
All right. So crypto, do you think do you see any major provider? Like, I'm not seeing much crypto offering on e-commerce sites right now. I don't have any clients that's seriously asking for it. Some are asking the question, should I have Bitcoin or something? So it's up to you. I don't mind adding it to your website. Am I recommending it? That depends if you care to be paid in Bitcoin. See, Tesla just stopped getting Bitcoin payments recently. So I don't know if it's a personal decision if you want to accept or not cryptocurrency on your website. But do you see it as a trend that a lot of sites are asking for it?
No, and that's why I think it would be great. I think the challenge with Bitcoin is a lot of people don't want to spend it, which I understand given the environment we're in right now. But yeah, I think with Tesla they drop Bitcoin, but now they accept Doge, I believe, which doesn't make any sense to me. But I would like to see it more. And the technology's come a long way. One thing I talked about was the Lightning Network, and so that's kind of like a less secure but more cash layer on top of Bitcoin. That the fees are incredibly low, if not free, and it's instant. So it's good for smaller transactions.
And there's always concerns with anything that is cryptocurrency about like theft and fraud and so on, or the owner of the whole system just leaves with the money. There were cases like that. I mean, you hold it, you own it, and you just leave with it. And there's been some pretty terrible fraud cases like this. So, okay, Bitcoin seems to be a reliable, solid, stable one, secure enough. That some Bitcoins were stolen historically, but not that much. Seems to be good. Like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, the golden rule is what people say is called not your keys, not your coins. So they're always stolen when you're leaving your money in the control of someone else, and that's generally like an unregulated exchange or kind of a sketchy exchange. So I would never recommend leaving your money in the hands of someone else. It does take an added layer of responsibility in your life that most people aren't accustomed to. But for e-commerce and stuff, like if you keep some money in your what's called your hot wallet, which is your internet connected wallet, and you can use that for buying and spending, and just keep the bulk of your funds safe. It's the equivalent of like putting it in a safe.
Right. And you feel that is safe enough, but is that by sticking to the main cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and a few other? Like, how safe can you be when you go to something that is unregulated, that then the person has, let's say, hundreds of millions of dollars of value and could actually just sort of run away with the money? As the company founding this, because it's not backed by a government, and then you would need to launch some kind of lawsuit and to actually have jurisdiction over this, because of those few cases that were in the headlines of some smaller crypto, not Bitcoin, smaller cryptos, like founders was just running away with the money.
Can you give me an example?
I don't remember the name, but basically, everybody's depositing money to buy that cryptocurrency. So it was a fraud scheme, obviously, but he just received all that money and he just leaves with it. And thank you, everybody. Crypto's done. we lost the coins or whatever it was. I
like
don't remember the exact headlines.
Is this with like some alternative, like small coin that's like
it's smaller ones? Yeah, it was a smaller one, but it was still lots of millions of dollars. So like, there's a question of like, okay, it's outside of government regulation, but it's also part of that is sort of scary. It's like, okay, are you really gonna just like send $1,000, $100,000 transfer to some sketchy currency, and that, like, what's the intrinsic value of that? There's none until you have a big enough pool of users who decide to use this as a currency, and then all those small currencies are sort of fighting for supremacy. It's anyway. I'm not at all an expert in crypto. It's more like newbie questions I'm asking you from like a just understanding point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the Wild West. So are there a lot of scams? Absolutely. And there's a lot of money going into this space. So it makes sense that if you're dabbling in these weird corners of this of crypto, you could get scammed. So that's why like I really just tell people to stick to Bitcoin. And if you want to venture out from that, you can try Ethereum. And then, from there you should be a little bit more experienced that you can, increase your risk tolerance. But if you're just in Bitcoin, these are really not things to worry about.
Okay, so let's talk about open source versus SaaS e-commerce, because this is an important decision to creating your e-commerce store. So open source are platform like WooCommerce, which is on WordPress, Magento, and some others. SaaS software will be things like Shopify, BigCommerce, and some others. Now, what's your opinion on this, Mitchell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly open on my views, and I'm a big proponent of open source software. Now, I'm not going to claim that this is the one size fits all for everyone, but that's the way I choose to invest my time and in our company's time for a myriad of reasons. I think we can go into some of the ideological things, but even from a technical perspective, as open source software is moving much more upstream. You've got these companies that have so many different pieces of custom software that they built over the decades, and it's a lot easier to kind of integrate them together if you have full control over your stack. So if you control WooCommerce, for example, we can easily build a connector for these 10 different apps, and WooCommerce can be your hub. Like, I absolutely just love that flexibility. There are drawbacks, of course. Shopify is a wonderful platform. There's a reason why it's big, and a lot of people are very happy with it. It's just, for me, you're at the whims of a company. So if they decide they don't want to add a new feature, well, you might not get it. And if they decide they want to remove a feature, well, you're going to lose it. And I don't know, if they get politicized for whatever reason, they might kick you off. So I'm just a big proponent of owning your software and owning your store and keeping you in control.
Okay, it's a very interesting point of view. Of course, if you have your own store, nobody's going to shut down your store because they don't like your industry or whatever. Let's say you're selling CBD, cannabis oil, whatever. They have policies that they want to, of course, create stable marketplace, those SaaS companies. But now let's say open source versus SaaS. In general, for most startup, not all of them, but for most startup, it makes a lot of sense to go on the SaaS route. And this is not what I offer Magento or on the open source side of things. But SaaS will typically give you a lower upkeep cost, a lower maintenance cost, and a lower startup cost. And what's the trade-off is then you have less flexibility, less capacity of creating a unique user experience. If you're setting whatever widget, and there's a lot of other stores online selling the same widget on Shopify, you're all going to look more or less the same. Of course, you're going to have different colors, a different logo, but the overall experience will be more or less the same. Of course, there's some add-ons, plugins you can put to personalize a bit Shopify, but that too has its limit. So Shopify's aim to keep the cost very low, and they do this by controlling a lot what is possible or not possible in there. And they put a very tight sandbox as to where you can play in this. Even when the extension makers are creating those extensions, it's limited what they can change. And Shopify is like that black box. So that keeps the cost the lowest there is. Then you have other platforms like BigCommerce, which is a very interesting platform as well. That is sort of like Shopify, but way more flexible. It also more flexible also means more complex, but you still have most of the benefits from a SaaS of you don't need an IT team, you don't need to bother with hosting and finding your hosting providers, and the scalability is there. It's a great platform. So BigCommerce is getting closer to the open source in terms of what's possible to do for flexibility, but you still have some other various drawbacks. And then you have the open source community, which are enormous, and you can absolutely create everything there. The downside, well, the upkeep cost is going to be way higher because it's on you to upkeep everything. Version updates to publish. Sure, WordPress will automatically publish, install the minor security patches and version updates, but you will still have major version updates to do and plugin updates to do. And it's the same with Magento extension. You still need to do those. So it's mostly, do you need to offer a lot of personalized, unique customer experience, perhaps have more flexibility in integrating with custom softwares, perhaps a custom ERP, enterprise resource planning system, an accounting system. The larger a company is, and the more complex their need is, typically the more they tend to go toward open source. Because you may have a very large company that has actually simple needs. They're selling t-shirts, it's red, green, blue, small, medium, large, and they're a very big company, but their needs are super simple. And in that case, it's logical for that large company to go on something like a Shopify or a BigCommerce. Now, if you have a large company that has a complex ecosystem, they sell a lot of custom options. They have lots of warehouses in one country. They have multiple countries, multiple languages, a lot of complexity. Then you go naturally more toward an open source solution to have the added flexibility to really build what that company needs as a system for their unique needs and for a worldwide presence. So the mid-size and larger company typically have a lot of complexity and will often prefer an open source approach.
Dude, again, Guillaume, you nailed it, dude. It just reminded me that I was thinking about open source software and how Apple uses an open source CRM because once you get also to a certain company size, you don't want to share your data with anyone. And so they're either going to build their own system or use an open source one.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I wanted to think on the small scale, I do agree for a lot of people, you could just spin up a Shopify store. But on the other hand, that is going to be limited to where they offer their services. So one beautiful thing about open source is the community. And I go to these meetups. They're called WordCamp, and they happen all around the world. It's for people who build on WordPress. And I'll never forget, I met a small team of guys who came from Vietnam. And they were like, well, we all use WooCommerce. Every store here uses WooCommerce. I was like, why is that? And they're like, well, just Shopify wasn't available in our language. So we took the software, we just built the Vietnamese translations, and we were able to use it. And we could use our own local payment providers. Whereas, again, if you're on something like Shopify, they're more or less going to dictate what payment provider you can and cannot use. And it can also be really great for those small, scrappy startups that, depending on if the established solutions aren't available for you.
Very good point, especially when you get out of Europe and America. Yeah, totally. Okay. Hey, nice point. Okay. Anything else comes to mind about open source and SaaS?
I think we just covered a bunch of it. Honestly,
Yeah,
there's no perfect solution, and a lot of it's going to be dependent on what your needs are, what you believe in.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can add one more comparison here, which is the full custom build. So not built on any framework per se, like not a WordPress, WooCommerce, not a Magento, and say, oh, let's build a custom app from the ground up, pure PHP or whatever, ESP, whatever you want to do it with. So that's another category that we hear on my side less and less about. But do you have an opinion on this one?
Again, yeah, you had talked about how some stores, maybe they're selling T-shirts, or maybe it's really complex. And I think for some really simple stores, sometimes it does make sense to just build your own, and you don't have a lot of those updates to worry about. So, like some people like build custom apps in Laravel and stuff, and I get it. I understand why they do it. But using the open source solutions, you can really leverage the community. So not everything is going to have to be built from scratch. Like if you want to increase your SEO, well, you go get the top SEO plugin. A lot of things are going to be made available already, and you don't have to do everything on your own. So that's why I think,
which is huge.
It's huge, and that's why you see the numbers going way down. Most people are going to the platforms.
Yeah, it totally makes sense, because otherwise you're alone on your side. If you're doing a true custom build from scratch without a platform, you're just using a PHP framework, Laravel or some other Symfony or whatever, and you build everything from scratch. This is going to be unbelievable upkeep costs. You say, okay, you don't need to do the updates, but at the same time, you're alone in your corner. And let's take some old example. Let's say when 2012, 2013, when the responsive web was a new thing, and then say 2013, pretty much all website was getting built in responsive. So if a technological shift like this happens and you've built your own custom software, you're stuck alone to face that and to bear all the costs. But if you're with a community and a platform, there are people who will donate their work, is the open source mindset, or there's a large corporation from a SaaS e-commerce platform who will bear all that cost and provide to you the new technological framework, and you're not stuck alone. So when you do something totally custom, you can be at the top of the game, but for a very short time, and then you'll need enormous investment in technology to upkeep that thing. Also, any change whatsoever you want to do, you're on your own again. Magento, you have thousands and thousands of extensions, either free or a few $100s, that you just buy this, and those can be thousands of hours of work and tens of thousands of dollars of labor, and you just installed it, you paid $100 for it, and that's that. So there's the power of worldwide community versus you alone in your site. So I'm not a proponent at all of custom development, not on a platform.
Back to the original point, we talked about mistakes not to make. And I think a good one to say is invest in the good extensions, the good plugins, because if you compare it to what man hours would cost you to build such a thing, it's not a big deal to spend a couple $100 on a good add-on for your store, because for someone to build it from scratch would be 100, 200, way more X the cost to build it from scratch.
Absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes, it's not $100 difference between plugin 1 or 2 that should make any difference, whatever in your decision.
Absolutely.
Which one is the correct one for my business? Because building this would be so many hours of work anyway, it would cost so much more. Okay, pretty good. And in many cases, you could even add to the list of pitfalls, building your e-commerce website on a full custom platform without using either a SaaS or open source foundation. Something we see the requirements for sometimes. There's a very rare use case where it could actually be good. I can try to think of some huge companies, and if what's existing on the market is not addressing directly their needs, would be revolutionary or something, maybe, but even then, typically they should go with a platform.
Yeah, and the only time I see people going down that path is they get the shiny ball syndrome. They just hear something is new and fancy, there's a new language, there's a new way of doing things, and they just want that. No solution is going to be perfect. So, pick one horse and ride it and stick it through and make the most of it.
So let's talk about that new buzzword in technology. Headless PWA. PWA stands for Progressive Web App. Just a brief introduction what that is. Buzzword we hear a lot here, that the front end of the website, what you see, the interface, and the back end of the website are completely, they call decoupled, meaning they're completely separate. You can totally change the front end without touching the back end whatsoever, which is not the case for, pretty much everything right now, Magento, WordPress, and so on. That there's still some level of intertwine and connection. Like, it could have been built this way even 20 years ago, but it's just not how the web was built. The web was built in a monolithic way that everything is stacked together, front end and back end. Without getting too technical, the classic model view controller technique for building things. Now that headless PWA has some benefits. It's almost like a native app. You could use almost all the native phone functionality. So it's like a website with the benefits of a native app. And you don't need to update it all the time. Like, you have to always update your apps, and always has the latest version, always has the latest content. So it's like the best of both worlds. You can even have some offline capability, just like a native app. So it's very interesting. The speed is often better than traditional, not always, but often. So there's a lot of benefits. Let's talk a bit about it. It's a buzzword. Like, I've been hearing it in Magento space since 2017, and now is still an early adopter thing in 2022. So what's your opinion on PWA headless?
To be honest, we don't have that much experience, because we had like a team hackathon a couple of years ago, and we decided to build some headless sites and to see where we kind of found limitations. The one we always found was with the payment processing. So, they always had some sort of like hosted iframe or something that kind of we couldn't build it entirely headless. But now that the world, or the web anyways, is moving towards everything's API driven, API first, it makes sense to build headless. So, I think it's just going to be a use case and a preference. If that's what people want, go nuts. But to be honest, like in the WordPress space, more of the hosts are kind of building up in order to support that. So I don't know if it's entirely like a buzzword. There's a lot of foundation and substance behind it. But at least for our company, it hasn't been a major request. It's only been kind of, again, people throwing around buzzwords. They don't really know why they need it.
Well, yeah, it's more expensive also to do. Like some people were marketing it as, oh, it's going to be less expensive, rapid development, so on. No, even some recent white paper from Adobe 2022. I mean, it's more expensive PW because we're in the early phase of that technological shift. It's a bit like when the DVD player cost $1,000, and eventually some years later it's costing $39.99. You know, so we're still in the early days of PWA stuff, and the project more or less cost double. You know, so there's a lot of unforeseen problems. Even the experts don't have that many years of expertise because it's only been talked about since like 2017. Let's say in the Magento space, been talking about in a long time before that, but it's nothing truly new. It's a bit like when cloud computing came out. Like, well, that's been around forever. It's just never been like a buzzword. It's like, it's not a new concept. It just maybe now it makes more sense with faster internet connection that to just like sync everything to a network. So it's a bit the same thing with headless PWA. We're still in the early adopter phase, not the first one, but like maybe the second wave of early adopters. And we can see almost all the platforms, even like Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Magento and the others, they're all saying that they have a PWA headless capability, which is either half true or totally true, depending on which platform we're talking about. But we see that all the platforms are going toward that. There will be some great benefits once it's more mainstream. Let's say in Magento space, again, the extension that you can just add to your store, there are so few. There's just a handful of them that are PWA compatible. The great majority of classic extension, well, or for classic Magento, and you cannot use them. So there's that question also, chicken or the egg. It's like, yeah, but if I go with this, then a lot of my extension that I would benefit from having that open source marketplace, I'm not going to get it. So it takes a bit of time, but it's growing in volume, and it will pick up.
Dude, you nailed it once again, man. You're always on point. I love the comparing it to the DVD player, but again, you're jogging my memory because not a lot of the extensions, as we talked about, which really make development costs lower and more accessible. A lot of them aren't ready for PWA, so it's like, man, you're gonna have to rebuild a lot of this from scratch, and that's a huge cost to bear. So we got to wait for the rest of the market to catch up.
Yeah, and I was talking with, let's say, the owner of one of the big extension maker in Magento, which is called Amnesty, and the CEO is like, "Well, sure, I'll make more PWA plugins when more people buy them." It's still a business; it has to be profitable. So he said the bulk of the market is still in the classic.
Makes sense.
And that slows the adoption of PWA because they say, yeah, but I'm stuck with so few extensions to work from. I'm going to have to reinvent the wheel or bear the cost of transforming that extension to PWA myself because it's not available in the marketplace. So anyway, but it does grow. It will pick up. It's maybe just not exactly. It's for the larger company at this point. There's no doubt whatsoever about it. So someone who wants the best of the best, let's say on the Magento side of thing, okay, go PWA, but do expect to invest to support to have what's the latest and greatest, because it is still, let's say, let's call it final beta version.
I like that. Guillaume, you're a true professional, man. You know what's going on.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Anything else you'd like to cover today, Mitchell?
No, I think we'll save it for another time because, like, I was thinking about NFTs. I'm sure you probably haven't dabbled there yet, but it opens up an interesting way of interacting with the web. And if any of your listeners have dabbled with NFTs, specifically using MetaMask, it's a cool way to interact with the web, and it's an exciting space that we're exploring a little bit too.
Well, let's keep it for another episode, as you say. We can make more, that's for sure. There's plenty of knowledge here to make plenty of episodes. So, Mitchell, if people want to find you, what's the best way to do this?
Yeah, it's SauCal.com, SAUCAL.com, or just hit me up on LinkedIn, or subscribe to our newsletter. Any of those work, or Twitter. We're all over the place. Just search the name.
All right. Well, thanks for being here today, Mitchell.
And thank you for having me, man. And I think it's worth noting, actually, we're going to be dropping an ebook here pretty soon. And we did a really big deep dive on comparing WooCommerce to other platforms. And so if you guys are out there and you're trying to figure out which one to use, it could be a good resource for you.
And where can they find that resource?
We'll be publishing it at socal.com on our blog here fairly soon.
Okay, pretty good. All right. Well, thanks again, Mitchell. It's been a pleasure having a chat with you today.
Thank you, man. And likewise, take care, bud.